In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, welcome friends to the 57th episode of Crime and Punishment, a legal podcast, not a political one. The official podcast of the Invictus Law Firm, PA, a criminal defense law firm in Orlando, Florida, the website for which is augustusinvictus.com. We are simulcasting to a bunch of places, but it might be dropped down to 2 given this restream news, but we'll see. At the moment, we are simulcasting to YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, DLive, Twitch, I believe Facebook. You can subscribe to all those by looking in the description, where we have all of those links. What I always forget to post, though, is the newsletter, which I'm going to post as we speak. That's the last issue that we made. But you can go there and subscribe to it. That would be swell. And that way you'll be signed up for the next one. And the other thing I always forget to post is the viral style, which is now posted. So let's make sure the audio is working. Looks like it's working on my end. Today is going to be a labor of love. We're going to talk about not the news. Okay. I was looking up articles. I've been looking back to Twitter to see what I've posted. I was going to talk about the Espionage Act and its constitutional history and legacy. I was going to talk about this memorandum in 2019 that opposed charging Trump with obstruction. I was going to talk about what's going on here in Florida. People were voting, shouldn't have been voting, thought they could vote, allegedly. Mainstream media comes out supporting sex offenders and murderers. And that big bully DeSantis won't let these people vote. And not just that, he charged them with felonies. Had them charged with felonies for voting when they were ineligible to vote. But they thought they were eligible to vote. I was going to talk about that. I was going to talk about, what's his face? Eddie Grant, the guy that sings Electric Avenue, suing Trump over using Electric Avenue in a tweet like years ago. And I realized I really don't care about any of this. This isn't really news. It's circus acts. It's nonsense. However, like 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes before we went on air, New York Times released the affidavit. Fox News released the affidavit that we talked about on last week's program. If you recall, there was a difference between the Justice Department saying, let's release the search warrant and all the things we took from the house, on the one hand, and on the other hand saying, here's the affidavit that we used to secure that search warrant. Because historically, we know that affidavits for search warrants are a lot of lies, a lot of the time. So I was going to talk about how there are pages and pages blacked out in this affidavit because it's so confidential. I'm sure there's so much legitimate stuff that they're searching. And of course, the special agent of the FBI who wrote the affidavit and talked and bragged about his, years and years of history doing this, that, and the other, his name is blacked out. So you can't know who made the search warrant, Soviet style. Yeah, I was going to talk about that. We might talk about that next week. Because what I want to talk about this week is legal theory, which is what I actually like talking about. I will say, though, before we start that, one of the stories up for discussion, I don't know if it'll be next week or the following week, because I understand this is, I want to say 26 days. Unheard of. This 26-day trial on whether Nicholas Cruz should get the death penalty for the Parkland High School shooting. Boy, there's a lot to say about that, I would go to his Wikipedia page. Wait, he doesn't have a Wikipedia page. The shooting has a Wikipedia page, and a section within that Wikipedia page says perpetrator. And it's allegedly a biography of Nicholas Cruz, but really, it's a left-wing hit piece about Nicholas Cruz. Imagine that. Wikipedia, known for its neutrality, its professionalism, its veracity. Imagine that it would say something slanted about Nicholas Cruz. Obviously, we are not defending a school shooting, and obviously we are not taking any sides when it comes to politics, because we here at Crime and Punishment have no political opinions. We love Big Brother. However, when you go to this section and you look at behavioral issues and social media, boy, it talks about the J word and the N word and immigrants, racist, homophobic, anti-Semitic, xenophobic views, swastikas, the whole 9 yards. I mean, you can imagine. Just go there if you don't believe me, but obviously that's what all this swings. He's a hateful white supremacist. Everybody knows it. And he's crazy, as all white supremacists are. Anti-Muslim slurs, anti-black slurs. Ooh, terrible. You know what they don't tell you, and what's super interesting about this entire trial going on? They don't tell you that his mother was a lesbian. They don't tell you that his mother was a lesbian prostitute. They don't tell you that his mother was a lesbian prostitute junkie. They don't tell you that his mother was a lesbian prostitute junkie who was smoking crack and drinking alcohol while pregnant with Cruz. They don't tell you that she sold him effectively, putting him up for adoption so that she could get money. They don't tell you about his adoptive father dying when he's 5. They don't tell you about, putting him on ADHD medicine, about his mother. Everything you could think of. Check, 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 check. Every single thing that liberals say, this is going to make things better. This is progress. Homosexual mothers, let's give kids to junkies. Let's put them all on psychotropic drugs. Every single thing on the checklist. Nicholas Cruz grew up with it. That's not on his Wikipedia page. His Wikipedia page is, this psychopath was in the ROTC, and he made anti-black and anti-Muslim slurs. They don't tell you how he grew up. They don't tell you about the horror of this kid's life. But I don't want to go into all of that until it's nearing the end. And like I said, I understand it's 26 days, if I'm correct, and it's only on like day 16, something like that. Like we're basically halfway through. So I feel like we should wait to discuss that. Although the thing to get more views on here is to discuss it as it's going on and nobody knows anything and, we're talking out of our rear ends. That's the way you get views on YouTube. But we're not going to do that. Which is why this program will remain unsuccessful for the foreseeable future. Instead, we're going to talk about ancient Greek contributions to legal theory, because that is also a way to get views on YouTube. The attorney next door to me, whose name will remain anonymous, he has a book on his shelf called Legal Theory. It's by a professor named W. Friedman. Wolfgang Friedman was a Jew who escaped the Nazis in Germany. He became a professor of law at Columbia, has an amazing CV, as you can imagine. This book was written in 1967, at least the 5th edition. The first edition was 1944. We're not going to comment on any of that background. Instead, I'm going to go right into the book with zero commentary on his background. Let's just get into this. So Chapter 1 is titled The Place and Function of Legal Theory. Chapter 2 is titled Greek Philosophy and the Basic Problems of Law. Chapter 1 is 2 pages, and I'm not even going to read the whole page, or the whole chapter. I just want to open with this. It's a brilliant opening. And you'll notice, as I talk about Carl Schmitt a lot on this program, I don't think Schmitt would disagree, which is an interesting entanglement, so to speak, between the two authors. Friedman writes, all systematic thinking about legal theory is linked at one end with philosophy and at the other end with political theory. Sometimes the starting point is philosophy, and political ideology plays a secondary part, as in the theories of the German classical metaphysicians or the Neo-Kantians. Sometimes the starting point is political ideology, as in the legal theories of socialism and fascism. Sometimes theory of knowledge and political ideology are welded into one coherent system, where the respective shares of the two are not easy to disentangle, as in the scholastic system or in Hegel's philosophic system. But all legal theory must contain elements of philosophy, man's reflections on his positions in the universe, and gain its color and specific content from political theory, the ideas entertained on the best form of society. For all thinking about the end of law is based on conceptions of man both as a thinking individual and as a political being. What an opening to a book on legal theory. Law cannot exist except on a spectrum between philosophy and politics. I don't think Carl Schmitt could have said it better himself. I was talking to a friend this morning about Shia LaBeouf. If you'll believe this, what a year we are having. What a crazy time we live in. Shia LaBeouf has gone full traditionalist Catholic. You might, if you're not Catholic, you might not know who Bishop Barron is, but he's a very influential bishop. Has the Word on Fire Ministries. He makes homilies every week. He did the video series on Catholicism, shown in RCIA programs all over the country. I mean, Bishop Barron is hugely influential and a brilliant guy. I loved his book, The Eucharist. I have it on the shelf behind me. But he is full-on Novus Ordo Catholic. He interviewed Shia LaBeouf because Shia LaBeouf just did a movie about Padre Pio, a saint who both sides of the aisle seem to love, the Novus Ordo and the traditionalists, all respect Saint Padre Pio. Shia LaBeouf started talking about the Latin Mass, and Bishop Barron gave him some pushback, and Shia LaBeouf just kept going at it, just kept saying, look, these people are trying to sell me something in this Novus Ordo. They got their guitars out, they're doing all this weird stuff, and everything's in English, and I know all the words, Latin Mass, and he just kept going back to it. And he called out everybody for trying to change the Latin Mass. It's unbelievable. If you had told me this 10 years ago, that Shia LaBeouf would do something like this, I'd have called you crazy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Sent it to a friend who may or may not be listening to this program, and he said, sent me a meme, and I said, yeah, well, my problem with this, my concern is that it's going to be like The Punisher, where as soon as the quote-unquote extremists start supporting it, he's going to throw the whole thing under the bus, right? So John, I think his name's Berthol, the dude who plays the Punisher, I don't care what anybody says, he's an excellent Punisher. It's in Daredevil season 2, and then they did 2 seasons of the Punisher by itself. And the alt-right, as we all know, those evil, hateful, white supremacist people, if they can be called people, they said the Punisher is our guy. This dialogue that he had with Daredevil, where Daredevil's clearly this libertarian, we got to do this, we got to treat people, we got to listen to people, we got to give them trials, so on and so forth. Punisher says, no, the system is corrupt. These people need to pay, basically the entire alt-right position, he is saying it, and alt-right comes out supporting the Punisher, and he says, F those people, Jewish actor, hated the alt-right. As soon as the alt-right embraced the Punisher, alt-right got thrown under the bus. That was the parallel I was making, or the reference rather, that all these extremist, traditionalist Catholics with their Latin Mass and their extremist symbols of rosaries, so on and so forth, if they start saying, well, Shia LaBeouf is right, what a miracle this is, he's going to possibly say, no, forget these people, and throw them all under the bus. So the point of that whole background was my friend responded with, well, the thing about Catholicism is it's not about ideology, it's not about politics. Christ is king, and that everything is downstream from there. And reading this is what reminded me of that. That everything about law is on the spectrum between philosophy and politics. There is no escape from it. And if you are in a human system, and that human system creates law, then you are between philosophy and political ideology. So it could start at the political end, as Friedman says, where socialism and fascism began. Or you could start at the complete opposite end with philosophy, Christ is king. God created the world in 7 days, if you're evangelical. Somewhere on that spectrum, that's where you're going to find the law. But you can't escape one side or the other. Because this is the world, the real world. And there are going to be factions, and there are going to be different places on that spectrum. In any event, go watch the Bishop Barron interview, because that's fascinating. And what a fascinating opening to a book on legal theory. So I just want to comment on that. Before we go to chapter 2, I see C.B. Robertson is in here. He must have seen the title, Ancient Greek Contributions to Legal Theory. This man wrote the book on the Odyssey, the hero and the man. Check it out. CB, if you want to post a link to your book, I will not consider it solicitation. He says, isn't it suspicious, though, when brand new converts disagree with such certainty with the most venerable of veterans like Barron, though? Especially in hierarchical organizations like the church. Yes, I see what you're saying. My friend said the same thing earlier this morning. Let's hope that Shia LaBeouf actually sticks with this, and it's not just about the movie, or he doesn't walk away from tradition or the church or anything like that once the movie's done being sold, right? That was my first thought as well. I think everybody would be naturally suspicious. Like when an internationalist liberal businessman suddenly runs for president as the nationalist on the ticket. Not that could ever happen in America and couldn't possibly win and then later be investigated by the FBI for colluding with Russia. But everybody should be naturally suspicious at first blush, right? But then I thought, it's probably what everybody has thought about me for a couple years now, right? So I'm willing to give Shia LaBeouf the benefit of the doubt here. Let's see where that goes. Anyway, all of that is introduction for chapter 2, but I do want to comment on this. Joe Biggs says that Padre Pio said Mussolini was in heaven. It is my understanding that that is a fact. That is what Padre Pio said. Chapter 2, Greek philosophy and the basic problems of law. The Romans laid the foundations of modern analytical jurisprudence, but their contribution to legal philosophy has been slight. What there is of it is mainly eclectic and second-hand, such as the writings of Cicero and Seneca. From the Greeks, on the other hand, we can learn little for the modern law of contract, tort, or property. But all the main issues of legal theory were formulated by Greek thinkers from Homer to the Stoics. The rise and development of the polis, the Greek city-state, was the persistent background of Greek speculative thought on law and government, from the descriptions of life in a city-state on the shield of Achilles in Homer's Iliad to the reflections of Plato and Aristotle. But only the combination of two factors could produce the abundance of mature thought on the function and problems of law in a community. The social disorders, internal conflicts, the frequent changes of government, the many periods of tyranny and arbitrariness provided the external stimulus to speculation about the relation of higher justice to positive law. But only a unique gift of speculative insight and intellectual perception, a sense of tragedy and human conflict which is apparent in Greek philosophy and poetry, made possible the Greek contribution to legal philosophy, and in particular to the problem of eternal justice and positive law. A lot to unpack in that paragraph. He says two things, this combination of these two factors, only those things could have produced this abundance of mature thought on law. One is the external stimulus, a bunch of crazy history, a bunch of crazy Greek history of tyrants, arbitrariness in law, injustice, all these terrible things on the one hand, and on the other hand, a unique gift of speculative insight and intellectual perception that is unique to the Greeks. Every culture in the world has those external stimuli of injustice, tyranny, arbitrariness, frequent changes in government, internal conflicts, social disorders. Everybody's got those. But the Greeks had this unique gift of speculative insight and intellectual perception. How did they come by that? If it wasn't the external stimuli that gave it to them, it's almost as if it was inborn. Like it was the people themselves. One might even use the word racial. But we won't. We can only speculate as to what Professor Friedman meant by this. Here's another thing to unpack in this paragraph: the problem of eternal justice and positive law. We talked about that on this program before, maybe not in that specific phrasing. Positive law we have discussed on this program, which is, I decree this law, or we the people make this law. Positive law or positivism, it's got a very negative connotation these days, especially with people who are quote-unquote natural law people. Certain people, they want to believe that there is an order in this world that can be discovered. That our laws should be based on the eternal order, the natural order, the God-given order. There are others who believe, well, the law is just what we all come to agree to, right? It's the social contract. It's whatever the population demands. Let's get together, let's vote on it. And whoever has the biggest numbers wins. And that's law. That's how it's done. Here in the United States, modern United States, I should say, it used to be that you could argue natural law in a court of law. Can't do that anymore. Now it's, what does the statute say exactly? And is there case law based on that statute? I don't want to hear what's in the Bible? I don't care what Koch and whoever else said. I don't care about Kant's theories. Are you kidding me? What does the statute say, counselor? Do you have any case law on that, attorney so-and-so? If not, I don't want to hear it. That's positive law. The eternal concept of justice, however, there must be an order in the universe, and a moral order at that. Not some, deist concept of a God who wound the clock up and then walked away and doesn't care about us anymore. But there is an order specifically created with a morality behind it, where the good are rewarded and the wicked are punished. Now, how do you square a concept like that with positive law, where a lot of insane, arbitrary, unjust laws are passed? And that's an historical fact. And you don't have to look far. You could look at it right now. And it's not, crazy right-wingers saying, well, look at the laws now, they're corrupt. It's not crazy left-wingers saying, well, look at the laws under Jim Crow, they were corrupt. It's the entirety of human history is unjust law. And we are all attempting, as legislators, as lawyers, as judges, we are all attempting to approximate eternal justice. How do you effect that here on earth? That's a huge, bloody question. Professor Friedman continues, the following sketch of the main problems, as formulated by the Greek philosophers, is no more than a brief introduction to the problems of modern legal theory with which this book is primarily concerned. The following sections are from Homer to Pericles, Plato's approach to law, Aristotle's contribution to legal theory, and then it goes into chapter 3. So, basically, Homer to Pericles, Plato, and then Aristotle, right? And of course, I'm sure for C.B. Robertson as well as myself, the most interesting section is going to be from Homer to Pericles, right? As Nietzsche said, Plato is boring. In Homer's work, law has an essential but unproblematical place. Law is embodied in the Themistes which the kings receive from Zeus, as a divine source of all earthly justice, and which are based on custom and tradition. Right off the bat, super important contribution, right? Look at medieval kingship. There's a book I often plug on these programs, Kantorovich, The King's Two Bodies. Fascinating book. My professor in law school recommended it to me, and I loved it. Couldn't get enough of it. I didn't care for the Middle Ages being, whatever. I didn't care for the Middle Ages until I read that book, and I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. One of the things that rubbed me the wrong way as a philosophy student was being forced to read garbage like Locke, right? I mean, you read Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and he is actually making arguments based on the Bible. Are you kidding me? Like, he'll quote the Bible and say, well, the Bible says this, and so, we have to plow the land, and if you don't plow the land, then you're not using it, and therefore you've abandoned it. Like, how does that pass for reasoning? Now, as a secular college student, agnostic, occultist kid, yeah, that's ridiculous. But as a lawyer with thousands of years of legal history, that was not a novel thing to do. In medieval times, they would say that the kings descended from Adam. There's a divine right of kings, and they were put there by God. They had not just the vote of their peers, like knights voting for who should lead the country, or Germans voting in a thing for who their tribal leader is going to be. These people were ordained by God to be king. That didn't necessarily come from the Bible. That's a very ancient Greek contribution to law. Because as he's pointing out, kings received this Themistes from Zeus as a divine source of all earthly justice. So that translated well when Christianity came to Europe. That translated into these kings are descended from Adam, the first man, and they had the divine right to rule. Justice is still identical with order and authority. An awareness of the conflict between positive law and justice becomes more and more pronounced from the 8th century onwards. Again, positive law being, I, the king, declare this is my law. Now, is that in accord with eternal justice, or is this the whim of the king? Right? He's saying from the 8th century onwards, this becomes a more pronounced conflict. It arises against a background of social trouble, of discontent with the rule of aristocracy and frequent abuse of power. The problem of justice, dike, becomes articulate in the poems of Hesiod and of Solon, the great Athenian lawgiver. Both appealed to Dike, the daughter of Zeus, as a guarantor of justice against earthly tyranny, violation of rights, and social injustice. Solon sees Dike as rewarding civil unrest and injustice with social evils, while she rewards just communities with peace and prosperity. The problem of the relation between justice and positive law dominated Greek thinking, as indeed all legal thought ever since. The nature philosophers of the Milesian school turned to external nature as a source of law more permanent than human laws. The process by which Heraclitus found the law of nature in the rhythm of events and subsequent thinkers came to conceive of nature as opposed to reason, nomos, is described in the following chapter. You might recall from previous episodes, nomos, which is translated here as reason, is what Carl Schmitt was talking about in Nomos of the Earth, the mapping out of the earth, the division of the earth, the reason, the order of the earth, right? His concept of the changing from ancient concepts to the medieval Christian concept of international law to this modern concept, especially since liberal internationalism found its heyday in Bretton Woods leading up to this modern world in which we find ourselves. We live in the new nomos of the earth. This development led Greek thinkers to a contemplation of the relation between the outer world of the universe and the inner world of man. In the first phase, the main theme is the tragic antithesis between the need to obey the positive law of the state and the higher moral claims of the unwritten and unaltering divine law. Tale as old as time, right? Like St. Augustine said, unjust law is not law. It's a theme that's run for thousands of years. It's not Greek, it's not Christian, it is just the human way of things, right? There are just laws, there are unjust laws, there is human law, and then there's the higher law, where you are judged by a higher court. That's not something specific to medieval Christianity. That's our entire history. And Friedman is arguing that this was a contribution to our legal thought by the ancient Greeks. In the first phase, the main theme is the tragic antithesis between the need to obey the positive law of the state and the higher moral claims of the unwritten and unaltering divine law. The classical expression of this is found in the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles. Both Aeschylus' Eumenides and Sophocles' Antigone end in the appeal to the respect for law as the main guardian of order, peace, and harmony in the state. Both are still dominated by the sense of accomplishment which preceded the decline of Athenian democracy, a belief in the progress which a civilized and ordered community dominated by wise laws had made over the anarchy and tyranny of earlier days. The last classical expression of this phase of Greek legal thought is Pericles' funeral oration. Now he's going to quote the funeral oration, at least in part here, and I feel like we should talk about all of that that just came in. First of all, this nonsense about a belief in the progress, blah, 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 wise laws, so on and so forth, over anarchy and tyranny. You would think that thousands of years later we would have given up on that, right? We would think, well, the ancient Greeks thought that they had come up with it, right? They had progressed to this wise, ordered civilization based on reason. You would think that, well, okay, that didn't really work out because of whatever factors. But now, we in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we've got it figured out. And we have the benefit of Kant, who showed us that democracies don't go to war with each other. So as long as we're all democracies, we've ended war, man. It's over. We can reach the end of history now. Progress. And then come World War I, World War II, Soviet Union, fascism, Nazis, so on and so forth. You would think that we figured out now, of course, progress is an illusion. It's a lie. War is always waiting for you. It's always there, just waiting to have its day again. It's not going away. There is no such thing as progress in human affairs. But we just keep telling ourselves that lie. That's one thing to point out. Another thing to point out is Pericles' funeral oration itself is from a book called The Peloponnesian War, which we've discussed many times on this program. My professor in law school, with whom I did an independent study, who shall remain unnamed, first book he made me read was Thucydides' Peloponnesian War, and I thought to myself, what in God's name does this have to do with law? It was an independent study on international law. That was my academic concentration. Turns out to be one of the greatest books ever written. I highly recommend the landmark Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. The landmark edition has all the maps, so you can see where everybody's going and what they're doing. Without that, it's just I can't imagine. You'd have to be a Greek scholar in order to keep up with all the references, all the place names, all the people going which way and that way. Get the landmark version, but read it, because it's amazing. And it will tell you all about realpolitik. One of the most vivid examples that it's always in my head, is this part where they're talking about, Thucydides, that is talking about the Athenian navy sending out its navy, the Athenians sending out their navy to war to like raid this other city-state and just crush it. Not because they had violated any treaty, not because they had kidnapped Princess Helen. There's no reason behind it. No moral reason is even bothered to be given. He says they sent them out to exercise their navy. In other words, if you leave the military just sitting around, they're not getting experience. They're getting soft. People are going to leave. They're going to go farming. They're going to go having kids. So they sent the Navy out to train these guys, give them experience. Dude, who would admit that about our modern military system? Who would even, broach that subject? Like, well, we got to send these guys to Nicaragua, or we got to send these guys to Colombia. We got to keep them fresh, man. We got to give these special ops guys trainings. We got to keep Iraq going because, look, man, we have no legitimate war with an actual state on the horizon. Russia and China are not insane. They're nuclear powers. We're not going to fight them. Like, there's no one on the horizon who poses a threat to us where we're going to get into a war. And, we've got to keep these guys in shape. We've got to keep them on their toes. We've got to give them experience. We've got to give them training. Let's just keep them in Iraq. Let's put them on tours in Afghanistan. Let's send the special ops guys to Latin America. We got things going on all over the world. You're exercising the military. Nobody would put it like that. God, no. Heaven forbid. No. No. There's narco-terrorists in Latin America, and it is our moral imperative to make sure that they don't terrorize the populace. Exercise the military. How cynical. Saddam Hussein, he did try to kill my dad, after all. The immortal words of George W. Bush. Well, with that kind of moral reasoning, how could we not invade Iraq, right? And by the way, they had weapons of mass destruction being built, and they wouldn't let the UN come in to check it out. We got it, not because we've got to, give our guys experience, kick in the door, do some nation building. How cynical would you have to be to think like that? That's the beauty of the Peloponnesian War. It is not cynical, it is sober. Every line of it is a sober assessment of this is what happened, this is why this happened, this was the effect of it. No emotion. Well, I wouldn't say no emotion. My personal theory is that Thucydides was sore about being exiled by some of these people who were in the government, and I think there were some people like Cleon. I think if I remember his name correctly, to say he's uncharitable about Cleon would be a stretch. He hates this guy. There's nobody stupider in human history than this guy, right? And he just rips the guy apart. I have the feeling that there was a personal beef between them. So I wouldn't say there's no emotion in the book, but his assessment of the causes of war, the causes of conflict, is second to none. So I'd seriously recommend that you read it. Point of all that being, Friedman is about to quote from Pericles' funeral oration, and Thucydides' Peloponnesian War is where that is recorded. Pericles says, "If we look to the laws, they afford equal justice to all in their private differences. If no social standing, advancement in public life falls to reputation for capacity, class considerations not being allowed to interfere with merit. Nor again does poverty bar the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition. The freedom which we enjoy in our government extends also to our ordinary life. There, far from exercising a jealous surveillance over each other, we do not feel called upon to be angry with our neighbor for doing what he likes, or even to indulge in those injurious looks which cannot fail to be offensive, although they inflict no positive penalty. But all this ease in our private relations does not make us lawless as citizens. Against this fear is our chief safeguard, teaching us to obey the magistrates and the laws, particularly such as regard the protection of the injured, whether they are actually on the statute book, or belong to that code which, although unwritten, yet cannot be broken without acknowledged disgrace." Bunch of flowery prose, if you ask me. Pericles' funeral oration is one of the most famous orations in all of human history. I think it's overrated. It's like, there's a scene in Voltaire's Candide where he's like, why do we ascribe all this feeling towards these books that we probably haven't even read, and some really aren't that good when you think about it. I actually feel the same way about Voltaire. I don't understand why he's taught in school. I don't understand why people think he's a good writer. But that one line in that one book I think is right, even if it is a self-reflective paradox, because I just don't care for Pericles' funeral oration. I think it's a bunch of nonsense. It's like when people talk about the rule of law today, this abstract concept, that just exists out there in the ether, and We're not a country of, ruled by men and their whims and caprices. We're a country of laws. Just horse manure, man. Just absolute garbage. Those laws are written by men. Those men are paid by special interests. Those men will not be reelected, or they will certainly not get their campaign funds replenished if they don't do what the lobbyists are asking them to do, or the people paying their campaigns. Right? You don't get in bed with, let's even use an example we don't even like. The audience, rather. The NRA. You don't get in bed with the NRA and then not, take their legislation when they put it to you. You don't take money from Shell Oil, getting millions of dollars in your campaign account, and then not listen to them when it comes to oil regulation time, right? You don't take millions of dollars from Big Pharma, from the Sackler family, from all these pharmaceutical companies pushing oxycodone, and then not consider their input at the very least, when it comes time to talking about this total epidemic of opioid deaths. We're not a nation of laws. We're a nation of people making laws, but they're completely unaccountable because it's a democracy. There's no one to point the finger at but ourselves. We voted for these people, right? They can't be held responsible for that, which is an argument against democracy in a book that we definitely will not talk about on this program called My Struggle. It's probably an obscure book, but he makes that exact point, the author of that book. There's no one to point the finger at, right? In a monarchy or a dictatorship, you know who made those laws. You know whose head has to be cut off if those laws blow up in everybody's face, if they're tyrannical, if they're unjust, if they destroy the country. You know who to point the finger at. You know who to behead. In a democracy, it's that guy's fault. He voted for it. Well, he voted for it too. Well, I was asked to vote for it by my constituents. No one has the blame. No one has the responsibility in a democracy. Let's talk. LOL, country of laws, says Sequoia Band. Yeah. Every time I walk in the courthouse and they have equal justice under the law, like in the courtroom above the judge, I LOL to myself. Whatever. Plato's approach to law. Let's continue with Professor Friedman. It is the subsequent decline of Athenian democracy in the Peloponnesian War and after, which provided the background for the preoccupation with justice that dominates the legal philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. As in our own time, of course that was 1944 to 1967, but as in our own time, the decline in the standards of government and society stimulated the yearning for justice. Oh, I guess that does apply to our own time. How about that? Faced with the disintegration of Athenian society and the disruption of the very values and accomplishments which Pericles had praised, both devoted a considerable part of their work to a more concrete definition of justice and to the relation between justice and positive law. But as Kelsen has pointed out, Kelsen is some author that wrote the Metamorphoses of the Idea of Justice. I've never read it. But he's assuming that you, the reader, know who Kelsen is. So as Kelsen has pointed out, they approached the problem from two different angles, contrasted by him as the metaphysical and the rationalistic approach. Plato attempted to derive his conception of justice from inspiration. Aristotle developed it from a scientific analysis of rational principles developed against a background of existing types of political communities and laws. The connecting link between them is the concept of virtue, arete, the all-embracing idea of which justice is a necessary part and aspect. Did somebody say arete earlier in this program? I remember seeing a comment about that earlier. Yep, top short, long bottom, said arete. Saw this coming, didn't you? The all-embracing idea of which justice is a necessary part and aspect. When I was a philosophy student, arete was explained to me as excellence, virtue. That virtue basically means excellence, though. From this flows the conception of balance and harmony as the test of a just commonwealth and a just individual. But here the ways part. Harmony for Plato is a state of inner balance of mind not capable of rational analysis. To Aristotle, it is the mean between extremes, deduced by quasi-mathematical principles from a blend of extremes in government and human relations. In his attitude towards the necessity and importance of law for the community, Plato's later message differs from that of his earlier work, and the Commonwealth pictured in the Republic. Who was it that mentioned that Padre Pio said that Mussolini was in heaven? That was Joe Biggs. Thank you for that. Mussolini based a lot of what he did, if not all of it, on Plato's Republic. That's a neat little tidbit you can take to Thanksgiving dinner, because we are just about a week away from spiraling into the holiday season. Thanksgiving's going to be here before you know it. So you can tell your family that Padre Pio says Mussolini is in heaven, and you can follow it up with Mussolini-based fascism on Plato's Republic. In the Commonwealth pictured in the Republic, the law as an organized and formulated system of rules binding upon the community has no place. That work is mainly devoted to an analysis of the functions of the different classes in the state, and in particular to the philosopher kings who are to control the state. The execution of justice is entirely entrusted to these rulers whose education and inspired wisdom are a guarantee of just government. It is the task of the rulers to see to it that man should do his work in the station of life to which he is called by his capacities. So the people don't go around deciding what they're going to do with their lives, deciding what the laws are going to be, voting on policies. That's all nonsense. In Plato's Republic, philosopher kings are educated from birth to be just, so that their laws are just. Plato's later work is, on the contrary, dominated by the problem of law as a formulated system of positive rules governing the whole of the state. If the Republic was a reflection of Plato's ideal state, experience and disillusionment, particularly his work as advisor to the Sicilian tyrant Dionysius, had brought him to consider the necessity of a second-best state. So Plato, consummate ivory tower professor that he was, took the Republic and said, this is how I think things should be done. If the world were run like I think it should be run, according to these principles, then the whole world would be a utopia, right? So he goes to Sicily. He convinces Dionysius that this is the way. And if you just enact these principles, then your city is going to flourish. The whole world will follow you and fall at your feet and see, well, look at what Dionysius is doing with this great philosopher Plato, and you will be the philosopher king. Well, it turned out to be a disaster. And so that's what freedom is talking about. After his experience and disillusionment and that misadventure, he then comes around and says, well, what's the second best state? So Plato's great work of his old age, The Laws, is entirely devoted to a discussion between an Athenian, a Spartan, and a Cretan on the principles and subject matter of laws in a state. But we'll have to talk about that later, because we are now out of time. It is 1556. Next week is the 2nd, September 2nd. Yep. We are really spiraling out into the holidays. I don't even know how it happened. This year is on its way out. You know, one day I'm going to have to get a tech guy like in the office Yeah, we'll talk about Cruz next week. Well, possibly the week after. We're going to wait till this whole thing plays out. See who they get to testify. Talk about Trump. I'm going to read that whole affidavit. Probably talk about that next week too. I don't know. It's all blacked out. Like, what is there to talk about? Which is exactly the point, right? So, until then, stay in school. Don't do drugs. See you next week, everyone.